a third generation owner and board director at your family business, Serganto Foods, which I believe everybody who is here in the US and know the brand very well.
I hope so.
Yeah, yeah. And today he helps families all across the world. So, in the past, I had very interesting discussions with people who came from family businesses who end up consulting others like Saputo, Daniela and Patricia, like Strauss family, like many others. So it's going to be very interesting. A couple of words, just so we get the story right. Sargento Foods is one of the largest privately held companies in the United States. It's one of the country's largest retail cheese companies. It was founded in 1953 in Wisconsin and led by Leonard Gentine and Joseph Sartori. And if you want to read later how they came up with the name, they mixed both names and made it sound Italian, right? I read about that at some point, which is interesting.
That's
it. Josh, and we'll talk about many interesting things here, is a family business consultant working with large families in businesses as they navigate complex multi-generational transitions. And some of the stuff we'll talk about is, I think, the difference between being a consultant that might be great, but knows the space very well and doing a great job, and somebody who actually came from a family business and seen it all, firsthand. I think it brings a different value, a different dimension, a different depth to understanding the complex world of families. His lived experience is basically you're bringing your experience with Sargento, with the experience at Deloitte Consulting, where he was an M&A consultant. And today we'll talk about different perspectives on how families can improve their dynamics by using tried and true leadership development tools found in corporate America. We'll also talk about the model of how M&A transaction can provide a framework for families looking to build multi-generational wealth through an operating business or family office. So that's our topic today. So good morning, Josh, and I think it was very wise that you decided to stay. And I just heard from you horror stories about the brave people who thought they would actually fly to New York and are now onboarding a plane.
That's right. That's right. Even if I wanted to get up there, I wasn't going to get up there. So here we are.
Yeah. So Josh, first of all, we had some calls before, and you're coming from a huge family business that you're a third generation of. First of all, maybe we'll start with the basics of. Tell us a little bit about the history of the business, so we'll have more context on your background.
Yep.
So let's maybe start there.
Yeah. So as you said, 1953, my grandfather, who was actually he was a mink farmer. Before starting Sargento, he was a mink farmer. He was also back in the day, they had the ambulance services were bifurcated by religion and by Christian faith. So he was the Catholic ambulance driver in our local town, Plymouth, Wisconsin. And then he was also the funeral director. He was an undertaker, which I joke seems like a conflict of interest to have the ambulance driver also be the undertaker. It's sort of like vertical integration. So he was a mink farm. He was your consummate entrepreneur. But Plymouth, Wisconsin, at the time was the cheese counter. It was essentially the board of trade for cheese back in the day. And so his friends were all of the cheese buyers for the A&P grocery store and these big grocery chains. Well, they were his close friends. And so he started out by selling, just because he was a hustler, he started cutting cheese into blocks and selling them in gift boxes to clients. And from there, he worked with a good friend of his, an engineer, and they were the first ones to come up with packaging sliced cheese and shredding cheese. And they figured out how to do it and keep the cheese fresh longer in a package. And that was the start of the business. And so He was more of an engineer entrepreneur than he was a cheese maker. And in fact, for many, many years, we didn't make cheese. We just bought cheese. So my grandfather, built the business, went through a lot of hard times. My dad talks about the fact that he remembers sort of the company being on the brink 3 or 4 times when he was growing up. Um, but he managed to fight through it, and his kids all came back, and that's obviously what you did back in the day. And so, my dad is one of 5 kids. He had 4 brothers and 3 brothers and a sister, and the kids all came back to the business, and started working in the business, except for his sister. And the brothers all built the company into what we know today. That second generation built it, and so his oldest brother, an interesting story, part of the sort of the history of our family and why we ultimately did a lot of the stuff that we did to make sure that we were ensuring the continuation of the legacy. My dad's oldest brother was a guy named Butch, and Butch, who had been in the business the longest, when they were trying to go through the succession planning process, was not selected as the next CEO. They sat. This was succession planning back in my grandfather's time and my dad's time. They sat in the living room and said, "Okay, let's raise hands. Who's going to be the next CEO?" And it was Lou, not Butch, who was selected. And after a few years, Butch was upset with this and decided to leave and actually started his own cheese company, which is now run by my cousins, which is down the street from Sargento, and also a significant player in the cheese market. So um, we've got
What's
our
the name?
it's called Masters Gallery Foods, and they do private label slicing and dicing and shredding and so forth. And so they're producing a lot of the private label stuff while we have the Sargento branded product on the shelf. So anyhow, Lou ended up becoming CEO, ran the company for, I believe it was around 31 years. My dad ran our consumer products division, and my uncle Larry ran our food service division. And so between the 3 of them and obviously the leadership team of Sargento, and a lot of outside professionals and our board ultimately built it into what it is today. So Lou stepped back, I believe it was around, let's call it 6, 8 years ago, and his son Louis is now our CEO. And the business itself, we are in consumer products, obviously, on the shelf in grocery stores. We also do quite a bit of food service business, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, companies like that, and then we do a lot of packaged ingredients and so forth. So the company is in cheese in a lot of different areas. And now, right in my generation, Danny, we had 16, 17 of us in that third generation. And Louis, my cousin, Lou's son, is the only one of our blood relatives who's back at the organization. My cousin Nikki, her husband Mike, runs our operations, but it's really just the 2 of them from a family perspective, that are in the day-to-day operations. And I'll speak to it a little bit about potentially why that came to be, but. The board is now comprised of 8 individuals, 4 family members, and then 4 independent directors, and it's a fiduciary board. So have generational representation on the board, and then we have some amazing advisors who have been with the board for quite a few years, who have been invaluable to ultimately the growth of the organization.
And a couple of questions. First of all, so they were the first ones to figure out how to slice and pack it. I mean, there was nothing like it in the world, anywhere in Europe or anywhere else.
Not that I'm aware of, certainly not in the United States. And so my grandfather was really he was not just, he was an innovator. If I think about some of the innovation in cheese and in packaging, they were the first ones to put cheese on a pegboard at eye level. And historically, it was all in the bunker coffin coolers. You'd look down at the cheese and you'd pick up what you want. Well, my grandfather's like, let's put a hole in the top of the bag and put it on a pegboard, just like some of the other products. And so now it's right in front of you, and it helped build sales. They did individually wrapped sticks of cheese that you would see, snacks. That was one of my dad's projects.
Wow.
Zippers, yeah, things like that. And so it was really, how do they deliver a better cheese experience for consumers and understanding what do consumers want and how do we deliver it. And, yes, you can grade your own cheese on a grater, or we can do it for you, put it in a package, and you can use it when you want. So it's things like that that really differentiated Sargento from the competition.
And what about so when your uncle opened his own thing, did that go smoothly? Were they like, bless you, there's a big enough market, or was there like, hey, what the hell?
It's a great question, Denny. I don't know specifically. I know that there was always a little bit of tension, and I think um, my grandfather always felt bad about how that went down, and what came of that. And we continued to get together as family after that. It did not create a rift in any significant sense. And in fact, this past Christmas we were together, and there were that whole side of the family. Now Butch has passed away. He passed away maybe 20 years ago. But his kids still run that operation, and we all got together. There were about 86 of us together for the holidays this year, and it was all of the different families coming together. And so at this point, there isn't any animosity, and it's more of a just kind of a neat backstory. And obviously we're very we feel great that they've built the organization into what it is, and we're serving the same market, but we're very differentiated in what we do. They're private label, and there's a place for private label, and there's a place for branded in the marketplace.
And how did the family ended up as it is with the family? How come no third gen is involved? And
Yeah, it's I can only speculate. I haven't talked to my cousins directly about their own specific experience, but one of the things that we did early on, and I think part of it was a result of Butch leaving, and getting in front of this succession planning process and making sure that we did it right, is many years ago, my grandfather and Lewis really got in front of building a board. And this is one of the things that I talk to clients about all the time. It's amazing how large some of the companies that I work with, and they don't have formal boards, and they certainly don't have great governance around the boards if they have a board. And we got in front of that early, and we built a board, and it was comprised of insiders and outsiders. But those outsiders coming on, those independent directors, brought so much wisdom and perspective, and the ability for I think the family to hold the line on the agreements that we put in place. And so when I refer to the agreements we put in place, it's like, how are we going to operate as a family in the context of this organization and make sure that we don't backslide and bend the rules for family? And this is a huge challenge. This concept of nepotism, it isn't good for the family, and it isn't good for the organization. And by having independent directors, I think we are able to mitigate some of the challenges that come with nepotism, and making sure that it doesn't sort of rear its ugly head. But in addition to the board, we also put in place a family participation plan. And it's a really comprehensive document that outlines how are we as family members going to engage and interact as family members in the organization. So if I wanted to come back to the business, what does it look like? How is the organization going to approach that? And how am I expected to approach this as a family member? So we're not going to create jobs for family members just because they want to come back. We're not going to pay family members more than other employees just because we're family members. We put in place all of these sort of provisions and this governance per se around this to make sure that nepotism didn't creep into the family and the organization. And the board is there to say, hey, wait a second. This is the document. This is the family participation plan. We need to follow it. And it's for the good of the family members, the good of the organization, all of the stakeholders of the organization. I say all of that, Denny, because I think as I look at the family participation plan, you need to want to come back to Sargento because of the organization and the family, not because you're going to get perks. as a family member. And we were very clear. And I think my dad and his brothers, our family, they were great at having good, honest conversations about what do you want to do? Do you want to come back to this organization? If you do, fantastic. Don't think that it's going to be a free ticket. And so I think it gave family members in my generation, the third generation, the opportunity to say yes or no. And if you say yes, you know what the expectations are. And if you say no, that's okay too. There wasn't an inordinate amount of pressure or the expectation that you will absolutely come back. It was, there's an opportunity for you here if you want to, but you need to earn it. And ultimately, other than my cousin Louis, all of us decided to do our own thing. And I think it has served the organization. In some ways, it's also been challenging because obviously to continue as a family-owned company and the employees like the fact that we're family-owned and operated and that the family is quite involved in many aspects of the organization. We've got to have family members who are willing to come back. So,
And sometimes I hear, from the many stories I've heard throughout the years, sometimes being the next gen is tougher. I mean, not that they would worry about it too much, but it's tougher from the sense that everybody looks at you as like, oh, he's here because he's the son of the owner.
yes.
And I've interviewed Gina Diaz Barroso, and they are Ascaraga family. I think that's
Mhm.
the family. They have huge business, and when she came to the business, everybody and in the publishing and media and TV stations, they told her, "Oh, it's the daughter." And back then, she was in Mexico. She said women weren't even, were considered very, very non. And yet, she came with an idea to do a magazine for women, and everybody said, "Oh, a stupid idea," and we'll let her get away with it just because she's the daughter of, you know.
Sure.
She ended up building a gigantic business and prove herself more than she probably would have needed was she not his daughter.
Yep.
And I have loads of stories like that. Even Carol Levin Bernick that spoke in the sold Alberta Culver to Unilever. This
Sure.
Chicago conference, tells the stories of she taking over the business and everybody, yeah, well, she ended up growing the business to a $4 billion business. I think when she took it over, it was 800 million or something. So it
Yeah.
wasn't bad, but definitely not what she managed to create.
Absolutely. Well,
So
and
it's not.
the thing is, Denny, I think about the idea of family members coming back and sort of best practices, whether it's a family office or a family operating business. Um, Again, some of the provisions we have in place, our family members need to go out. They need to have a law degree, an MBA, whatever it might be, advanced degrees, and experience outside the business. And getting that outside experience before coming back to the family business gives the family members significantly more credibility than if they just come back to the business right away. And it's sort of like, hey, listen, I've gone out there, I've done my own thing, I've cut my chops in other areas, I've got the education. And when they come in, they've got confidence and they've got credibility with employees. One of the things that just it absolutely pains me to see is when you have a family member who comes back and they don't have that outside experience, they don't have that credibility. And Denny, not only do the other employees sit back and say, well, they're here because they're family, that family member, you can see the insecurity. And for me, that breaks my heart because you want somebody who's back, who wants it, who has earned their position and has the confidence to lead and make decisions without feeling insecure around what those decisions might be. So, and it's beautiful when a family member wants to come back, and it's really neat when they come back and they're able to add so much more value because of the experience they've had on the outside, and then the opportunities they have inside because they are family.
And with you guys, for instance, I mean, I've seen, I shared it with you before. I've seen it, and probably you so many times. The tension, the jealousy, when there's always needs to be one leader, and there's always going to be the other guy that his wife would tell him or her husband would tell her, "Hey, you should have been doing that job, not he." Why? In your case, your uncle's son is the CEO of the company. Is that going always smoothly? You know, the kids are, oh yeah, fine. If he's got the talent, he should do it. Or is there like, you know what, I should have done that, or I should have been here and there.
No, it's a good question. I think in some ways we don't have that lens only because other members of the third generation didn't come back. They chose to do different things. And so really it was Louis who was, if there was going to be a family member who was the CEO, it was going to be Louis. But I think to my point earlier, Louis went out and got great experience. He went out, he got experience in banking, he got an MBA, he came back, and part of what we have built internally is if and when a family member wants to come back to the organization, there is a very clear development program for that family member to make sure that they're getting cross-functional experience and sort of the rigor necessary to lead. And so at least from my vantage point, and I think I can speak to my brother and sister as well, we look at Louis as a phenomenal leader. And he's earned the trust of the employees, he's earned the trust of the board, and he's proven it, in just the economics of the organization. And so there's no question that Louis, from our generation's perspective, is hands down just a phenomenal leader.
And your parents and Louis are not bothered why the next gen is not excited about joining. We want to have, stay in the family and have the third gen take over at some point,
Yeah.
and nobody cares.
This was Danny, the hardest decision of my life was talking to my dad and telling him, "Hey Dad, I'm not going to come back." And I've got a weird background. After undergrad, I did some work abroad down in Tanzania. I came back home, did some nonprofit work, and the entrepreneur in me is like, no, I'm gonna go do my thing. So I ended up in the soda business and the chocolate business with these small companies. But meanwhile, I went to undergrad at the University of Notre Dame. We didn't grow up a hardcore Catholic family by any means, but I always sort of thought in the back of my mind, what about the priesthood? Is there a call there for me in some way, shape, or form? And I ignored it for years. And so I was doing this entrepreneurial stuff, and I was like, you know what? I need to go try this. I'm gonna regret this the rest of my life if I don't. And so I applied to the seminary at Notre Dame, and because I had been dating somebody, I didn't get in. And they're like, wait a year. So I'm like, all right, well, first of all, I was a little surprised that, good Catholic kid that wants to be a priest, I couldn't get into this seminary. Was sort of a disappointing day. But they're like, hey, wait a year. So part of, again, I go back to that family participation plan. Part of the plan says, if we're going to come back, you're going to have an MBA. So I decided, all right, I'm going to hedge this whole seminary thing. I don't know if I want to be a priest or not. I'm going to go get an MBA. So I went down to Carolina, Chapel Hill, spent 2 years, got my MBA, and then I went to the seminary. And the seminary is not because you're going to be a priest, you're just exploring that option. And so talking to my dad about the fact that I'm going to go to the seminary, the implications of that for me, my brother was a teacher, my sister was a teacher. They were not coming back to the organization. And so Louis was back, and it was just me. I was kind of the last one in my generation who had an interest potentially in coming back and was doing the things necessary to come back. And so in saying I'm going to go to the seminary also meant saying no to being a part of the family business. And to add a sort of a layer of dynamic to that, my dad doesn't travel. He has really bad anxiety. He won't get on an airplane. And so saying no to the family business is also saying no to being in my hometown and being in Plymouth, Wisconsin, where my dad is. And he was alone. So there were a lot of implications to that. So anyhow, I ended up at the seminary. I spent a year there, realized after that year that I wasn't called to the priesthood. And so I left and felt called to Deloitte M&A instead. And so I joined Deloitte. And while I was at Deloitte, that's where I started to build my own confidence and realize that as much as Sargento was an amazing opportunity, it's not what was right for me. And honestly, Danny, when I started working with families, and doing and advising families with family companies and family offices, I realized very quickly that it was this amazing combination of being sort of a pastor, a business strategist, and somebody who has lived through those experiences and can speak to kind of the emotional nuances of it all. But it was hard telling my dad, "Hey, I'm not going to do this." It was his dream that for me to come back, and to say no was tough. But ultimately, if I had gone back, it wasn't right for me. It wasn't right for me, and I wouldn't have been a good leader, frankly.
We have lots of great questions. By the way, it's funny sometimes in family businesses, sometimes you have to do what you have to do, even though you're not the right person for the job. I can tell you, I hate managing people.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do that as part of what we do because that's kind of how it grows. But anyways, I don't know what my point was. My point was that we have some questions from folks and we didn't even start with the questions I have for you, which is why I thought, this would be an interesting discussion. So we probably should do another one, but we'll get to that. So just quickly,
Yeah.
I mean, because before I start jumping to the other questions, so someone is asking, there are several questions I'll ask you. And if we are, let's see. Do you have an investment committee? Are there family members amongst the quorum? Is there an intern training program to employ the young generation of the family from high school before they go to college? And it's a lot of questions. How does the family core company support family members who choose to start other businesses, doctors, engineers, and others? Is there an internal lending and partnering program with family members?
Okay. I can speak to these. I see the questions. Good question. So,
Camille, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah. And thank you for the questions. Those are great. So, first of all, we have our operating company, Sargento Foods. About 5 years ago, not about 5 years ago, we created a family office. And the purpose of the family office was more around tax and estate planning and versus sort of pooled investments and so forth. And so we have the operating company, we have a family foundation, we have a family office. I sit on the boards of all three of those entities, and so kind of have that perspective into each of them. Do we have an investment committee? No, we don't. Not in the family office. We have a governance committee within the family office, and obviously we have our fiduciary board in the organization, but we don't have an investment committee. We do not do pooled investments. We all manage our own investments, versus different types of family offices, which are doing collective investment. And, we've talked about it, we've explored it, but, the family has made a decision, at least at this point, not to do that. The other questions, is there an intern training program for the younger generation before high school and so forth? Yes. So we're working on our fourth generation right now. And the fourth generation can come in for sort of a learning day in the summer where they get to meet with the family office, the folks from the family office, to learn more about the business and some different sort of financial elements. And then they can also go sit with others within the organization based on their interest. And Louis gets together with them, and we're starting to sort of cultivate an interest without the pressure, right? We want to expose them to a lot of different things. Once you're in college, you can intern in different parts of the business throughout the summer. And that is a place where we certainly will make an opportunity. We will find an opportunity for family members who want to come back and intern, because it's great exposure. And this is one of the things that I talk to clients about all the time. It's like, okay, don't create the job for the 30-year-old family member who can't figure out what to do. Do create the job for the 18-year-old family member who's starting to show an interest in the organization or the family office, because that's a really valuable exposure that they're going to get as they grow up. So yes, there is a training program. Once you're in the organization, then there's a very significant mentoring training program that we've set up. HR gets involved. We have the board involved. There's quite a bit of rigor around that. Let's see. Then the next question is about the core company supporting family members. The core company does not. There isn't some sort of internal lending program or partnering program. that we've built out, and I don't foresee that being the case. We have been very fortunate. Sargento has been a profitable company, and there is a distribution program that's a part of the organization. It isn't one of these things where you can live your entire life off of the distributions of Sargento Foods. We've been very blessed, but it is, you've got to have a job. You got to find a way to support yourself. And we haven't created any kind of pooled investment to say, hey, if you want to start a business, we're going to support it. If you want to start a business, you got to find a way to start your own business. And I think honestly, it teaches family members sort of the hustle that's needed, just like any other entrepreneur. And I think there's a lot of value in doing that. If you want to become a doctor, engineer, other career professional, we've got third generation members who are doing all sorts of different things, and you got to figure out how to do it on your own. You're not going to just get a handout from the organization. So, and then as I look at some of these other questions, do we have equity in the business? Yes, the company is still family owned. So between Gen 2, Gen 3, trusts and so forth, yes, everything is family owned at this point.
So we talked about you growing in the family business and have some lived experience, and you told us about most of your path. But so what has been your career path to what you're doing now, advising families? So maybe we didn't get to that part where that actually, and you ended up doing this. And how long have you been doing this?
Yeah, so I when I was with Deloitte, I was doing M&A. It's interesting. I was on the human capital team doing integration work, and a lot of it was governance and decision rights and organizational design, operating model stuff. If somebody told me that I was going to be sort of a governance guy back in the day, I would have rolled my eyes, because it just sounded incredibly boring, only to realize that governance and decision rights sort of drive everything. And so when I was with Deloitte doing the integration, that was my specialty. And then I ended up moving internally with Deloitte, doing operating model work for Deloitte Consulting and globalizing our infrastructure around that. I got into coaching, and I think this is probably the priest pastor in me. I wanted to actually work with individuals, and so I ended up going out and getting certified as a coach. I started working with some individuals. One of my clients was a family business CEO who didn't have a lot of infrastructure in place for their own family company, and so I helped them build that. And in the process, realized very quickly, like, wow, this is the right fit for me. And so I ended up pivoting out. I had a fund for a while in between that, actually while I was with Deloitte and doing the coaching. But when I started working with families, I realized very quickly that this was the sweet spot. So I've been doing this work 5.5, 6 years. And a lot of it started out doing coaching and very specifically in coaching, and then moved into building out succession plans, governance, family conflict, kind of full scope stuff. So I really play point between all of the different advisors that families have. I'm never going to replace your attorney or your financial advisor, but helping families create alignment, having conversations, creating alignment, and figuring out where they want to take their family business and what legacy that looks like. That's where I play. That's where I do a lot of work.
We have more questions from folks, but we'll get to it later on.
Yeah.
So continuing with with my agenda here, a conversation. When we spoke about it before, you spoke about how leadership development tools in corporate America can help families in businesses. So
yeah,
if you can share that.
Yeah, I look at the amount of investment that organizations put into developing employees, creating sort of individual or self-understanding, managing dynamics between teams, leadership development, all that. We have all of this investment in the organizations, and yet families often don't take the time and the energy to do that themselves. And so one of the things that I often talk about with clients is like, let's take a page from sort of corporate America and apply that to your family. So annual review for yourself. How are you doing an annual review for yourself? How are you looking back and saying, what worked, what didn't this past year? Because Denny, one of the biggest challenges in a family office and a family organization is self-awareness. Governance, estate planning, some of those things, they're not easy. Don't get me wrong, they're not easy, but they're easier compared to family dynamics and family communication and the interpersonal dynamics that happen in a family organization. And so the start of that is really self-awareness and understanding how you're showing up in your family, because that's impacting the other family members that you're interacting with, right? And so I talk about like an annual review. How are you doing an annual review? What was working for you? What didn't work in terms of your dynamics with your family members? And just reflect on it and understand, hey, how did I show up, and was that good or not? And we do this in organizations all the time. You sit back and you have an annual review. It's like, hey, what did you do well? What did you not do well? Same thing. So that's one of them. Personality assessments. I use Hogan assessment with my clients because it's a reputation, not a personality assessment, which I won't get into, but it's the exact same thing, like understanding self and understanding how the rest of your family members show up and going through an exercise of like, hey, what's your personality type? What's mine? We take family members for granted and we just assume we know them, but it's amazing. When I get a family into the room and I start to peel back layers of a personality assessment, they're like, God, I didn't know dad was like that. That explains why mom is who she is and so forth. And so I think it's a great tool that families can kind of use. The other piece of this is if I think about taking a page from the corporate playbook, it's continuous improvement and continuous feedback. You know, Denny, I sat down with my son. He's 7, so keep this in perspective. I sat down with him. I was like, hey, bud, like, how can I be a better dad? And I wasn't sure what I was going to get, but I was just like, if I'm going to talk about this stuff, I want to do it. And so I sat down with him. I said, you know, he and I have struggled in communication, and we're just very different people. And so I said, you know, how can I be a better dad to you? And he had 4 things. He wants more popsicles. That's how I could be a better dad. He wants more popsicles. He wants more playtime with me. He wants me to yell less, which I respect, and he wanted to snuggle more. And I think about that. I'm like, you know, that simple exercise opened up for me a recognition that I needed to spend more time just sitting on the floor playing with him, and that I could probably take another 2 minutes of just hanging out at bedtime with him and being aware of the fact that, like, maybe I do yell, you know, when I get frustrated, I probably raise my voice. I'm not going to give him more popsicles necessarily, but you know, the rest of it was really valuable. Doing that with your family members and saying, how can I be a better husband, a better dad, a better brother or sister? It sounds kind of cheesy, no pun intended, but like, I think it's valuable. And doing those sorts of things as family members and taking that page from the corporate playbook, I think matters. And then the last one is you know, conflict resolution. That's obviously a big part of what I do with families, is helping families navigate conflict. But you know, at Sargento, all of our leaders go through crucial conversations courses every single year to learn how to have difficult and crucial conversations. Families need to be able to do the exact same thing. Learn how to have difficult conversations as family members. So it's just a couple things, but I think there's a lot of tools that we can take and apply in families from sort of the corporate playbook.
Yeah, we have some more. I see the questions, guys. We'll get to it in a second. You also talk about using M&A framework for families building multi-generational businesses.
Yep.
How does that look like?
Yeah, you know, if I think about the last 2 weeks, and I think it's, you know, the holidays always stir up a lot of business in my space because families are together. But if I think about kind of the arc of M&A, there's for organizations, there's sort of like a moment where they recognize, all right, we need to explore M&A as a part of our business strategy. And the moment is predicated on the competitive dynamics in the marketplace, technology changes, whatever it might be. But families, it's the same thing. There's a moment where it's like, okay, I need to actually start to address succession planning. I need to start to think about this, whether it's a health situation, or just a recognition that like the senior generation is aging, and if they don't put a plan in place, there isn't a plan. And so I think about the sort of the arc of M&A. It's like there's this moment, then there's the future state and envisioning what that future state looks like. And so with families, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, the future state, what do we want for our organization? What do we want for our family in the context of this organization? Do we want to continue this as a family company or not? And answering that question is very difficult. And obviously, as you can imagine, there's a lot of different perspectives from different family members. And so doing a future state planning and thinking about what that looks like, then understanding the current state, doing a gap analysis, and then building roadmaps, and then executing and measuring. All of that kind of stuff happens in succession planning. It's like, if I were just to take an example, it's like, okay, dad or mom is getting old. We know we need to build for the next generation. We want to keep it in the family. We've got some family members who are a part of the organization. Let's figure out what we need to be and who they need to be as leaders of the organization. Based on where they are, we've got to build some training into that program. We've got to do that gap analysis. Let's make sure that we're giving them the education, the exposure, the experience needed to be the leaders we need them to be in the future state. And let's map this out and measure it. And that's where the board comes in to make sure that, hey, are we sticking to the plan? Are we doing this the right way? So I often kind of use that arc as a part of my work with clients, because I think it helps them frame it out and see it in a different perspective.
Now we have some questions from folks. So one is saying, one is asking what part of Italy is the family from. I'm not sure you got it from Italy. I think the name is and does you like dancing and tried the priesthood? Does that play into your qualities and business interests and skills?
Vince, I think maybe the priesthood does, the dancing not so much. I was in a charity dance off one time, and I'm guessing you looked me up on the internet and it shows up. I got to figure out how to get that removed from Google, but that's probably where that came up. But the family is actually French. It's Gentine. But again, the Sartori, Gentine, Gent, and we added an O at the end to sound Italian. So turns out marketing works.
What advice would you give to a new generation entering a family business to prepare themselves for leadership roles, especially when they might bring new perspectives or want to implement changes?
Yeah, good question. First of all, I think I'll go back to earn it. Earn it. Show your family, show the stakeholders of the organization that you're serious. You're a family member that's serious about the business, that you want to, the business, the family office, doesn't really matter. Show them that you're serious about it by building your experience, keeping your head down, and learning as much as you can. Oftentimes, family members play the family card. And while it's expeditious, I also think that it undermines your credibility immediately when you walk into the organization or the family office. And so I think going out and getting experience that is applicable to your family's organization or family office is essential. And showing up with that credibility gives you the credibility to then say, hey, listen, this is why I think we need to make the changes that we need to make. And you're substantiating that based on your experience and based on the exposure, not because you're a family member with a new idea. The other piece of this is change management. Change management, as much as I hated it doing M&A work, change management is everything. Understanding that, especially in a senior generation that has built an organization or has taken over an organization and built it even further, they've got a lot of credibility, they've got a lot of experience, and they have a lot of perspective. You need to recognize and appreciate that while also pushing the edges. I think AI, Danny, I'm not going to get into a whole AI conversation, but one of the things that I just wrote about the other day is the fact that senior members of families do need to talk to the next generation about what is the technology that they're seeing and how is it going to impact their business? Because I think things like AI are going to absolutely disrupt the model. And if members of the senior generation don't have their eyes on it, because if it isn't broken, don't fix it. If they don't have eyes on it, it can be very disruptive. And so I think going in with the right approach and saying, hey, listen, can we have an honest conversation about new technology that I see and what I think the implications are to our organization? Approach it like a professional, not a family member. Those are a couple thoughts.
And how do you think about hiring key leaders, chief positions? Do you promote from within the firm or use search firms?
Both. So we like to promote from within. We are a family company of, let's call it 2,600 people in a town of 10,000. So it's kind of a company town in some ways. There are other organizations there, but we believe in promoting from within. We also believe in giving our employees the tools to grow in their roles so that they can assume leadership positions. Simultaneously, we're competing against every major CPG company out there, in certainly in cheese and food and snack and so forth. And so we also recruit from the outside, and it's just the nature of the game. Now, for us, it's challenging because we're recruiting senior executives from major organizations who might be in New York or Chicago or wherever they might be, and we're recruiting them to Plymouth, Wisconsin, a small town. That's not an easy thing. Simultaneously, the culture, and this speaks to the family side of things. I think because we've done a great job of building the right family dynamics, there isn't nepotism in the organization. We are a serious family and a serious business. It's an attractive opportunity for executives who want to come to a family company, because we get the opportunity to make generational decisions, not quarterly decisions. We can invest in things that other companies won't, because we aren't beholden to the markets. And I think it gives us an incredible competitive advantage over some of our peers. And for a lot of executives, that's a pretty attractive value proposition.
Now, you really work at the intersection of individual family members, the family system as a whole, their business or family office, and ultimately their legacy and state. So what perspective do you have sitting in that intersection? Where are the biggest challenges and how do you address them?
So perspective from sitting at that intersection, Denny, I think it's, first of all, I would say that it's a blessing. I think for some, it can be a burden, but I look at it as this amazing opportunity of getting to sort of exercise all of the different things that for me make me me. I get to be sort of that pastor, that strategist, and I'm seeing what's going on in all these different areas. And because I'm working with other clients out in industry, I get to bring those things back to the family and hopefully build our own credibility, build our own experience, and help hopefully perpetuate our legacy going forward. Some of the challenges, I mean, the thing that keeps me up at night, and I think I'm not going to speak for Louis, but I know that he's concerned about it as well, is what do we do with the fourth generation? G2 grew up basically well, they grew up together. They had their families all in the same neighborhood. My cousins, we all basically grew up within 5 minutes of each other. G4 is global. My sister lives in Lisbon. My brother's in Vermont. We've got family members in Colorado and California and Idaho. G4, my kids and my cousins' kids are growing up without that direct tie to each other. So how do we make sure that we are building deep relationships with that generation, informing them about the opportunities at the organization, making sure that the values continue into that into that generation, and that they learn how to work together constructively. It's going to be challenging because they don't necessarily know each other. My daughter is 5. I've got my cousin's daughter is 26. We essentially have a generation in a generation, and navigating that will be challenging.
And last one I have for you is the advice you'd have for families in business as they navigate ownership transfer, wealth transfer, and continuing legacy, family legacies. And here, maybe I'll add my own personal question for you. You know, they always say the first generation builds and usually comes from nothing, works hard, comes from poverty that helps you, you know, drive it hard so you don't end up like your parents. Second generation is okay because they are still witnessing the hard work of their parents, even though they were born into wealth. So they're balanced. Third generation, where you lose the balance, these guys don't know what working hard means like. It's so far from them. And usually, you know, everybody say, yeah, third generation ruins the business. And usually that's where it ends. And usually the transition to the fourth is always a challenging one. And I saw a research that said something, you know what, it's not always that it's ruins as much as they just want to sell. You know, the third generation, it becomes too complicated, too many family members, they're just doing an exit. It's not that they ruin the business, just, okay, now time to take our share. And so I would want your perspective on that as well. But my question was about how do we help families navigate owner transfer?
So there's ownership transition and there's leadership transition. And transferring ownership does not necessarily mean we've transferred leadership. And this is one of the challenges that I see. There might be phenomenal trust structures put in place. There's ownership and share transfer from one generation to the next. But that doesn't mean that we've transitioned leadership. And so if I think about ownership transition and how to help families navigate ownership transition, this is going to apply to leadership and ownership. Communicate, connect with each other. This is like, I just wish more than anything that families would connect and communicate with each other and have good, honest conversations. And if that happens, if the dialogue happens between family members about the reality of life and the fact that one generation will pass away and the next generation either needs to be a steward of that entity, of that asset, and the responsibilities that come with it, or choose not to. But having the conversation is really important. And where things break down and where I see issues come up is when they don't have that conversation. So if you haven't, do it. Start the conversation. Just engage. You don't have to have the answers. You just need to get started. The ownership piece, obviously, there's a lot of complexity to transferring ownership and the tax implications and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into all of that, but I think the human dynamic of the conversation related to ownership. And then if I think about leadership transition and transitioning the leadership of the organization, the next generation needs to prove that they're serious people who are ready to take the responsibility. And you do that through your actions and your behaviors. You do that by proving to your family and the stakeholders of the organization that you're ready. And then sometimes the harder piece is if you're a member of the senior generation, you can't coach from on the field. You need to be willing to step back and coach from the sidelines, or better yet, the skybox, and actually get out of the way. And this idea of, and I've said it before to clients, I'm like, listen, the member of senior generation, CEO, you weren't ready when you took over. You didn't know all of the answers when you took over. Neither will the next generation. You have to allow them to lead. You have to allow them to make mistakes, to learn. Now, you insulate it. It's where a board comes in. That's where governance comes in. That's where, great guardrails come in. But you got to let the next generation lead. Otherwise, they'll never have credibility when you're gone. And the employees sit back and say, well, that next generation was just a puppet of dad or mom. They're not going to have the credibility, and that's a dangerous thing.
Somebody's asking, and because we're reaching an hour, but I want to grab another couple of minutes because I have another question, but some people will probably leave. So someone is asking, where can we learn more about the consulting work Josh offers? I would just want to tell you that this is being recorded, and you all will get tomorrow. Josh will send me his contact info to share with all of you that attended and those who couldn't make it today and will watch the recording. So we will send an email with all that information. So you will get his contact information. So what I wanted to ask you, Josh, another thing you see with families, many times when I speak to next gens is that the first gen wasn't there for them. They were working 24/7. They were not there. They were not a father. Sometimes I hear accusations. Sometimes you see pain. I would have preferred my father to spend more time with me than building another part of it. And when I speak to the first gen, usually it's the first gen that builds, and they're saying, well, it's very convenient for them to say that because they have security for their children. I wonder what would they say if they needed to struggle like others. So they don't appreciate the hard work I did.
Yeah.
Now, bringing all of COVID into this and working from home, I'm also asking you as a second. So what are your thoughts about that? And the second question is, do you think that COVID and working from home made us more available at home, or are we just fooling ourselves and we're lazy and we're not working hard as the first gen, so we will never manage to build something as strong as they build because we're not as dedicated and it will all blow in our face? Or times are different and now people are, now I have time to go to the gym, I have time to see my kids. Back then they didn't go to the gym. They probably died earlier because they were smoking and under pressure and don't have time for themselves, but they were very hard workers and that's how they got to where they got. There's no way that they would have, all these guys that built the first generation went through hell and back.
Yeah.
And sometimes they feel when the kids are complaining, how dare you complain? I sacrificed my life for you, working my ass off, and you're crying because I wasn't there enough for you.
Yeah. That is, there's no question that is a dynamic, that is a challenge with the builders, with that first generation founders. I think if you're a member of the next generation sitting back saying, well, dad wasn't around, mom wasn't around, you got two opportunities. You have two choices. Holding on to the resentment around the fact that mom or dad wasn't around. But the reality is you can't change that. And so you have the choice to either allow that to color and cloud your relationship with your mother or your father. But that ship has sailed. And they did what they thought they had to do for your family. And as I look at my grandfather, he was that to my dad's generation. Whether you're a mink farmer, ambulance driver, undertaker, or cheesemaker, like he was doing it all because he wanted to support his family. And I think there was love in that decision, even though it didn't look like it. And I think my dad and his brothers could sit back and have resentment around that. But he only did my grandfather did what he had to do at the time. And, they learned from that. And I think my dad was around a lot more than my grandfather was to him. And so every generation you learn from the next on what would you do differently. I try to make sure that I'm around a lot more for my kids because that's really important to me. And my dad worked a lot. And that was sort of the benchmark of success is how many hours. I don't want that for my kids, but at the same time, I knew my dad was doing what he thought was best for our family. And so for me, it's more about being aware of the fact that people are coming to life with different experiences and perspectives. And if they're not ours, we have to understand where they're coming from. To speak about the sort of COVID and working from home, I don't think that it's sort of breeding a next generation of laziness. There's some amazing founders. There are amazing creators who are working their butt off. I do think that doing this, Denny, we're not in New York together. If we couldn't do this now, if I had to be in New York, I would have left yesterday, not today. I wouldn't have been home for my family. This is giving us the opportunity to do both. And it's one of the things that I love about my work these days is that I don't necessarily need to be in the room every single day for every family engagement. We can do a lot of this, and it gives me the opportunity to be more of a dad, more of a husband, and still work my butt off. And I love it.
I once spoke with the businessman we were supposed to meet, and he said, listen, I cannot travel right now because I have a 2-year-old. I told him that's the reason I travel more. But that's a different story.
Right.
First of all, guys, a couple of quick updates. It's been a pleasure, Josh, having you here.
Thank you.
Joshua will be speaking at our conferences. We're just working out the schedule, so hopefully we'll be in Dallas. Our next conferences are Dallas on the 19th, Houston on the 21st, and then New York later on. We're today, by the way, we just found out the largest in the world destination-wise. Our conferences are in New York this year: New York, Miami, Houston, Dallas, Chicago, LA, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, London, Tel Aviv, and the UAE. And this year we'll probably do 2 new destinations, which are Cypress and Orange County. I also want to tell you very quickly that we opened a club that's just for families. That happened last year. That is chaired by Miss Lisa Silverstein, which is one of the largest families in the United States. And the reason we've done that was, instead of randomly running into families that you guys meet at the conferences, we thought we should build a curated group of families that we know very well, that are very diverse. We felt that the fact we came from originally Israel and technology allowed us to meet a lot of new wealth and old wealth. And those don't mix enough, and those can help one another, because old wealth can help new wealth with legacy and governance. And old wealth would probably want to invest with new wealth that is already working on the next venture, and so on and so forth. And the fact we are so geographically all around the place can help us mix people. So we don't care if you're a young president organization, old president organization, no organization, inherited, you have a family business. We care that you're a good person. We don't want arrogance. And we care that you have the means to be part of this. And we meet at people's homes. In the last quarter, we met at the Silverstein home in New York, Spielberg's Milky Way in LA, and the 7-Eleven family that we actually dragged from Dallas to Miami there. So if you want more information about that, do let us know. And that's that. So I hope to see you guys in Texas soon. Joshua, any last thing you would like to add?
No, this was a pleasure. Thank you, Denny. I really enjoyed it.
I have as well, and I have loads of more questions for you, and we should probably do this again. And I see you guys all have more questions, but we kind of ran out of time. We will send you Joshua's information so you can stay in touch, and we'll take it from there. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the week.
Take care.
Enjoy the snow. Bye-bye.